I'm Dr. Duke, and this is The New American. I'm joined today by Bill Hahn, Chief Strategy Officer for the John Birch Society. And Bill, you and I last month talked a little bit about where the JBS had been in 2019. We have a new year on the horizon, new focal points. And let's talk about the two of the most important agenda items for the John Birch Society. And look, I got to tell you, if these are the agenda items for the John Birch Society, then they ought to be the agenda items for any conservative, liberty-loving person. Because for 50 years, the Society has really staked claim to that agenda that's going to keep us closest to the Constitution and to keep us most in check with our liberties. So what are the two major things? Let's start with the first one. It's one that you guys have been involved with, the Society. We've been involved with since the 1950s, right? When we got started.
Exactly.
Get us out of the United Nations. And I would think that for most Americans out there, you wouldn't have to explain why, but tell me why.
Well, and the whole point, is that the UN, it's incompatible with American liberty and independence. You take a look at the charter of the organization and you compare it to our founding documents, it's like night and day. The charter actually thinks it grants rights, through government, and that's not the case. As we all know, where do our rights come from?
The Creator, the God. And to me, it's almost as if when they put together the UN Charter, they actually looked at the American Constitution and decided to do exactly the opposite. It is that seriously anti-liberty, anti-individual, anti-free market. This is really a recipe for globalism. There's no other way to phrase it, that the modern UN is not a league of nations. The word league, the idea that we all have in something common, is nonsense. It's not a league of nations. It's not an organization who's dedicated to peacekeeping. It's not a governing body that arbitrates between countries. It is a deeply funded, incredibly corrupted organization whose sole aim is to appropriate all world governance to itself.
Exactly. Yeah, and they've got their fingers in everything. You take a look at all the programs that they have, all the way from Agenda 21, 2030, up through the World Court and plenty of other pieces and parts that even people don't see. But yet, believe it or not, this now again, JBS has been part of the Get Us Out movement since I think this was the very first campaign that we had.
I think so.
And so, we're 61 years into it. And to be honest with you, Duke, we have never been closer to getting out of the UN as we are at this very moment. And we take a look at what President Trump and his administration has done to basically, stand up and say globalism is done, that Americanism will be our credo and not globalism. And the fact that we're going to be celebrating patriotism instead of globalism, it's fantastic. But we could go through a big checklist of all the things that that has helped to do to put the UN at arm's length. And I mean just a couple of those things, if you don't mind, is that we've cut the UN budget by about $285 million. We've also pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement. I mean, this was just a couple weeks ago, where it's now official, where that's going to be happening. We've also withdrawn from the UN Global Compact on migration. We've withdrawn from the UN Human Rights Council. And let's call the Human Rights Council what it is. It's nothing more than a collection of tyrants and demagogues. Mm-hmm. So again, going back to why it was founded, we absolutely need to get out.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up the money that we're not giving them, $285 million. I noticed that today in the news, they're claiming a budget disaster at the UN. They're calling for an immediate infusion of, I believe it's $26 billion they're trying to raise globally to continue to fund their anti-Western, anti-liberty agenda. I'd like to believe that more Americans, if they recognized that the UN is not a peacekeeping group, it is primarily a globalist group. If more Americans recognize that, millions of more Americans would oppose it.
If they were to see that they are actually working against, their rights, I have to agree with you. I think more people would stand up and say, yeah, you know what? We don't need them.
No, and this is, like you said, from the very originating year of the John Birch Society, this has been a primary focal point for us, because if you allow the UN to succeed at what it's doing, it by definition means the death of the United States.
Exactly right.
The second major issue, this is a kind of a not sexy one, right? But it is critically important. It's the USMCA. Right. It's all about trade and trade agreements, and a lot of people, they start to get a little drowsy when they hear it. But please talk about what the USMCA is and why we should all care about this.
Well, certainly. Actually, the USMCA stands for the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. And it's basically the renegotiation of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And while President Trump is really pushing it, I have to think that he has not read it at all, because he unfortunately has globalists that have surrounded him as far as in the negotiation team. And so our trade representative, who's in charge of all this, is a veteran member of the Council on Foreign Relations, a leading globalist group. And so we need to make sure that not only are we not passing the USMCA, but we also have to actually get out of NAFTA. When you take a look at what the globalists are using these trade agreements for, it's basically to integrate countries economically and eventually politically.
Yeah, and the key here is that if you don't like the European Union, if you recognize how the European Union has not united Europe, it has overridden the rights of individual nation states in Europe. Just look at what's happening in Britain. The English people voted decisively to get out, and they're still not out 3 years later. And 3.5 years later, they're still wrangling over whether they're going to get out. The will of the people has been inviolated, right?
That's right.
And so if this is what the USMCA basically is going to be, a North American Union, where Canada, America, and Mexico all dance to the same tune. It's not going to be Congress deciding what gets done anymore. It's not going to be the president. It's going to be these commissions that arise from this North American partnership that will actually override America's interests in the interest of this new North American Union.
Yeah, you got her. Exactly right. And the fact of the matter that it took no less than 10 treaties over the series of 60 years to put together the EU. You take a look at what we're doing with NAFTA, and that's 25 years into it. And the way that progress works with in the 21st century nowadays, we're looking at not at 60 years and not at 10 agreements, but it's going to be a lot less than that.
Yeah, it's going to move really quickly, optimizing this. Just to give you one example about how unbalanced this is, you'd like to think that a treaty like this would treat all participants equally. But when it comes to our fossil fuel rights will be turned over to the North American Union, while Mexico has negotiated their exemption from the same kinds of cooperation. So this is not a union. This is a reordering, a new world order, if you will, of North America that privileges second world countries like Mexico at the expense of first world countries like America, and to the surprise of nobody, the Canadians and their very progressive contingent is really pushing for this kind of control.
Right, and the fact that we're actually these agreements are actually taking the constitutional responsibility away from Congress and then moving it over into bureaucratic bodies that are unaccountable to Congress and as well as the states. I mean, that is a huge problem.
They are eradicating the role of the people and self-governance with this, right?
Exactly.
And as we see again with Great Britain, you get into this, and 10 years later you realize what a disaster this is. How Mexico is allowed to continue to drill for its oil, to process its fossil fuels, to profit from its natural resources, but we're not, right? That's how you get a devastating effect across all the nations involved, all three of them. You're not raising the standard of living for everybody. You are dragging it down.
Exactly. And we actually have a book on that called International Merger by Foreign Entanglements by Arthur Thompson. We're in our fourth printing of that, and I would suggest that people get to JBS or shopjbs.org and find that, because it talks about exactly what we're talking about here and that's international merger.
You know as well as I do, Mom and Dad, that the economy is the idea. It's the economy stupid, right? That's what it's the economy stupid.
Exactly.
That's who wins elections. If you care about the economy of this country, you will not support these kind of trade agreements that takes our self-control and our self-determination away from us. Oppose USMCA. Write your senators and congressmen and let Donald Trump know you don't like it.